Woo! Oh yeah. Welcome, Leah Piotroski, to the Underworld Party. I
Thank
am
you.
super stoked to chit chat with you about all the things that I think we're going to get into. Before we do that, I just thought maybe introduce yourself to the people, or however you feel good about that, so we have just a little bit of context about where you're coming from, where you're located, your sort of background. You don't have to go super crazy into it, but just a little bit of
All
data
right.
before we talk.
I am in New Jersey, on Lenni and Lenape land. I am a labor organizer, I guess, artist, all kinds of things, really.
Yeah,
It's hard to synthesize it all down to just like a couple keywords, I guess.
yeah. Mhm. Right. But labor
Addict.
organizer, artist, sort of like anti-fascist kind of person,
Yeah.
similar to
Abolitionist. Yeah,
abolitionist. Right. And do you identify as queer? I never asked you that.
I do. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So identify as queer. Do you identify as disabled too?
Yeah, that's actually a new one that I identify as. Um, I have chronic illness before the whole COVID thing, but I never really called myself disabled. Um, and then long COVID happened, and I'm definitely disabled.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sucks.
Yeah,
But I think that the reckoning that we all have to go through is recognizing how a lot of these terms have been captured by the elites to be like, those are the disabled people, and that's who we dole out a little bit of pittance to,
yeah,
and the rest of you, oh, you just have to tough it out, or
right,
like we. And I think that solidarity and labor organizing is about breaking down a lot of these false narratives that colonialism has sort of erected to pit us against each other in competition for like the scraps that the state doles out as like a, oh, this is like a gift, you should be happy that we're giving you anything. It's like, but where did you get any of that resource from? Is you
right.
stole it and it's our labor.
Yep.
And then you're trying to tell us that in order to get some of it back, we have to jump through hoops, and then you can deny us
Yeah.
all of that. And so I find that with race and with gender and with ability and disability, health and sickness, they're all used as these tools for essentially fracturing the power of people,
Hmm. Yeah,
and people do the
definitely.
work. People are the workers,
Yep.
and that could mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean, well, I'm a coal miner or something. It's like any labor that is being outsourced, anything that is being outsourced, and sort of like capitalism essentially thrives on this concept that the few can um, leverage the many.
Yes.
So I wanted to put all that out there because I wanted, to sort of like, this is my understanding of like how this system operates, and then how it sinks into individual bodies is sort of like the next part of that. How we start to become sort of like drones for the elite
Hmm.
by the caste systems that have been created by them.
Right.
Whether that's a police officer, a security guard, whether that's a manager, right? Like whatever the hierarchy is like wherever we are on the fake totem pole is where we sort of go, but I'm not like them.
Right.
I'm not like the homeless people because they're the lowest. I'm not like this very sick people because they're the weakest. And it's
Hmm.
like, oh no, honey, you're on your way. You're
Right.
on your way.
Yep.
You better, like, it's better to join up now than wait until you're forced to.
Yep.
Right. So I wanted to sort of get that out there. But I'm curious, so I want to give a little background and the background about the background. So I've chosen this virtual Zoom background, which I think everyone can see. The pink clouds. You can
Hmm.
see that, right? It's,
Yeah.
okay. So I started writing a bunch of articles about my take on theater arts, which is essentially just art making. I just call it's all theater arts. It's like whether you're drawing a picture or singing a song, it's all kind of a theatrical construction, right?
Right.
And so I've been trained in this very intense form of clown called bouffon, and there's another podcast in this series that I just it'll come out around the same time where I talk to my Buffon teacher. Um, but Buffon is an extremely intense clown form that sort of satirizes everything, including things that we think we shouldn't satirize, like death and sickness and disability and race and hatred and murder and all sorts of oppression. And it does it in such a way that it, in the best way possible, if you do it right, it should open all of our eyes to our shared complicity in the
Right.
in the thing we don't like about ourselves. And then we have a troubled kind of laughter. And that troubled laughter is the first step in actually being able to talk about it and maybe even change it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like this other way into social dialogue through a kind of satirical, grotesque lens of art making, which is
Yeah.
very like a punk rock aesthetic. You know, it's like we're
Oh,
gonna do this
definitely.
crazy, we're gonna do this weird, blood, body fluids and dirt and piss and shit and make crazy art that doesn't look like a beautiful European aesthetic. And we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to deal with that. And that's going to bring up emotions in us. And then we're going to be
Right.
able to talk about it because we have this sort of shared experience. So I was thinking through it and I was like, okay, so I call my version of this Death Clown. I want to teach it more explicitly. I've been sort of working up for years to kind of teach it more explicitly because I learned it almost 10 years ago, but I was like, this is actually like too intense for most people. Like, you have to have so many skills to deal with this. And I'm now at the point where I'm like, I have enough skills to deal with it, but now I have to start talking about it and sort of like write a book about it or some way to introduce people. And I wrote this one article where I was essentially trying to understand why is it that people have this weird codependency thing where like if they think that you're a hero to them, they will love you and regress to a child very quickly until they realize that you're just a fucking human and you're not perfect, which is just like what they did with their parents. You're not perfect, you hurt me, and then they go crazy because it feels like someone took away their toy or took away their magic pill or something. It's like, and so I was writing about this, and then you chimed in and said, yeah, in addiction recovery, we call that the pink cloud effect. And I was like, oh my God, this is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Yeah.
fucking perfect. So I'm coming in with this like shared like interest in like this pink cloud effect, how it intersects with addiction, codependency, narcissism, but also how it prevents us from kind of organizing together. It prevents a kind of labor organization. Um,
Sorry, I missed that.
yeah.
I keep
Well,
skipping
well,
out.
well, it's like the pink cloud effect and all of its kind of tentacles. It affects our ability to actually organize together as people, right? Like
Yeah.
in some way, it affects like because if I can't see you as just another human who's just like me,
Mm-hmm.
even though you have differences, but like we're essentially like both being oppressed by these, you know.
Right. My internet connection
I
is
think
getting
there's some
slow.
internet goofing
Yeah.
happening. Is it your end or my end?
It might be mine. I'm not really sure. It says I'm connected.
Yeah. Well, if it gets really bad, we'll go to sort of audio only, and that'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, but I wanted to sort of get your take on like how you've encountered the pink cloud effect, how you have dealt with it in your own life, and how you see it kind of all over the place. Like, where do you like how are you grappling with this in your neck of the woods?
From a labor perspective, I see this a lot with my fellow workers, and our union representatives save us from this toxic environment of oppression in the office. And then that plays out and it doesn't happen. They don't rescue us. And I see it a lot. I have a lot of friends who are newly in drug recovery. So this is like a constant thing that I'm seeing, especially lately. So like you know, with 12 steps, you get a sponsor and all that. And now the sponsor is the savior. And then, you know, you get some clean time and you realize that this person is another addict. You know, it's addicts helping. It's very like, how are you supposed to save anybody, really? Like, you can't do that, you know? And when you first and this is really for like substance abuse. I mean, there's addiction comes out in so many different ways, but specifically with substance use, you get this clarity when you have, you know, let's say 30 days a month clean, and you like are showering on a regular basis and brushing your teeth, you know, and it's like, oh wow, it feels so great and everything's perfect. And then like life happens and you spiral, you know, and I'm seeing that a lot, especially now with long COVID and people becoming disabled, years having all these new symptoms. And it's like trying to navigate the healthcare system that is horrendous. And it's like, you know, oh, maybe this specialist is going to save me. And, you know, then that doesn't happen. And you spiral again. And it's just this constant thing over and over again, when really you just have to be uncomfortable. I don't know how to really get to that point. I feel like it comes in like these little blips, you know, where if a new symptom will pop up and I'll spiral because it's like, oh my God, it's progressing and it's getting worse. And then some time passes and it's like, all right, well, now this is my new baseline, you know? So, you know, like it never really goes away. You just kind of take it with you and carry it. And, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too is like if you're in denial, like if you're in denial that you are addicted, that you have addiction tendencies like all humans do, like if you're in denial that you have narcissistic tendencies because you think that narcissism only looks this way and I don't do that, so therefore I'm not like that. If you're in that level of denial, which is essentially colonialism and white supremacy, which is like, there's me and there's the rest of you, and I'm the main character, and you're all fucking not NPCs, you know? Like, there's this weird thing that is going on. I think that if you're in that mode, every discomfort is a trigger for you to spiral and also to look for a new hero to save you, like a new like if I can just do the new, like, oh, now it's cold plunges, you know, now it's nicotine gum, now it's CrossFit, you know, like there's always a new over the rainbow pot of gold
Right.
that will make you better than the people that you don't want to be like,
Yep.
which is like the sick, disabled, poor, homeless, whatever you want to call the people that you are desperately trying to not be like in that group. You don't want to be lumped in with them. So you look to all of these saviors and snake oil salesmen because they're all also propping up this narrative that you could be saved. And the way that you could be saved is you kind of step on other people. And you just step on people yet you never see, like a child in a cobalt mine,
Yep.
right? And that's
Yep.
capitalism, is like, no, no, no. It's like you can have it all, in parentheses, at the expense of like 1,000 brown people somewhere that you'll never see, right? Like we know that. But it feeds itself continually, where we're constantly chasing this weird dopamine high of like finding the next thing that's going to save our symptomology, while also like stepping on a bunch of people to get there, right?
Yep. My internet is really cutting out.
Why don't how about you just go to video to
My
audio.
internet keeps cutting out. Okay.
You go to audio and we'll see if that's okay. Can you still hear me?
All right. Hopefully that'll be better.
Yeah, let's hope. But if it's not, I'll go to audio too, and it's totally fine. We'll have an audio
Okay.
conversation. It's totally fine. So I see this and I see how insidious it is because like everyone wants to be a Marvel superhero, right?
Right.
Like I mean everybody like wants to be like, "Oh, I never get sick and I never go to the bathroom and I never gain weight and I always save the world." It's hard, but I always win in the end. And that's how it's supposed to be, right? Like that's the American dream, right?
Yeah.
And the whole time, the American dream is like essentially cannibalizing children and black people and women and gay, trans people. It's just like eating, devouring people to sort of prop up the fact that a few of us could rise to the top.
Yep. Yep.
And I see this just everywhere in every aspect, and it even is inside of social justice movements.
Oh,
Like the people,
definitely.
the very people who are like saying all the words, I'm a leftist, I'm progressive, and then suddenly too much stress happens to them, and they're doing some weird, crazy, neo fascist, like eugenics tinted conspiratorial narratives about the new, it's just okay, it's like and then that's a new form of the addiction. It's just like when you take that first hit again. That first hit,
Yep.
you're in that narcotic high, and you're great, and every thought you have is a fucking genius thought, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like we all know this as addicts and former addicts, or however you
Yep.
want to do it, as people who are intimate with the addiction process, which is like the high, the low, the high, the low. I can't control it. What do I do?
Mhm.
I see this in people who think that they're not doing that, but they're doing it with ideology. They're
Right.
doing it with narrative. They're doing it with like this idea of belonging, this
Yeah.
idea of ancestry. And it's like, oh, you're just using this the way I used to use that.
Right. Right.
I did it with alcohol or with heroin or with whatever, psychedelic or whatever, but you're doing it with just this is your little toolkit over here.
Exactly.
These
Yep.
words and these ways of feeling and these emotions that you produce when you tell these stories about who's good and who's bad, you know?
Right.
And for me, it's like, there's no way we get collective liberation that way because it's just fucking impossible to, it's impossible to hold yourself separate from the group and still
Yeah.
do collective action. Like,
Right.
oh, it's not, like, oh, not me. It's impossible to be exceptional on some level. Like to
Yeah.
be an exception to the rule is in some way the problem I keep seeing is like, oh no, I'm not fooled by propaganda.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like not me, not me, you know. And it's like, no, that is the red flag I keep seeing, and it pops up everywhere, especially in people who are in some way are hopeless or desperate or
Yeah.
feel helpless, feel like they have no power. And so they're desperately seeking power and then they latch onto an idea or a person, a
Mhm.
figurehead. And then this whole weird addiction spiral happens again. And we're actually left more fractured because now we have more and more repair that we will have to do in order to sort of like make amends for what we did when we were fucked up, right?
Right. Right.
And then some people never do that because they go, it's impossible. So they get worse and worse, like they
Yep.
get more and more radicalized into some kind of neo fascist agenda because we actually in this culture have no, like, there's no normalized redemption arc,
Yeah. Yep.
which
Yeah.
in 12
Totally.
step is kind of like a redemption arc sometimes. And I think that that's why it's
It
available for
can
people and
be.
it works. It
Yeah.
can be. But just the fact that like addiction recovery is totally possible and then you can actually like kind of redeem your behaviors over
Mhm.
time. You could do that. Everyone has
Right.
to go through that. But I just it's so stigmatized. What we're talking about is so stigmatized that it's like when people go, I'm not a racist. It's like, okay,
Right.
so now you're never going to do anything about your issues because you can't see yourself implicated in the racist structure.
Hmm.
So, and that's the other thing with like, I see it with collective organizing and everything. It's like people can't see themselves as part of the whole. So
Right.
therefore, there's no movement towards collective well-being, because the minute you can exceptionalize yourself, then the elites can capture you and be like, come on our side
Exactly.
against your, like, we need an inside man, right? Like we need an
Right.
inside spy in the organization, like what they did with the Black Panthers and all the Rainbow
Yeah.
Coalition. Is like they just got the weakest links to sort of turn on people.
Right.
Um, and I see that happening now. It's just that now we all have like computers in our pockets, and so we think we're better,
Right.
doing better than some past terribleness or something. Um, yeah. Anyway, that was my rant. What do you think about? What do you think about that rant?
Hang on, I'm frozen. So yeah, I see this a lot in my work environment. So, my office is located across the street from our city's homeless shelter. So, I see a dynamic. There's a lot of people walking on the street, and then we have our executives in their office in the building I work in. And a couple weeks ago there was someone who was intoxicated, and he took a wrong turn and ended up in our parking lot. And I happened to be coming. I was the only one that knew about it, and I tried to redirect them to go back out onto the sidewalk, because I knew that the people in this building think of themselves as exceptional and that they aren't like this person. And even though, if they lost their job, they would be destitute just like this guy. um, so it this hierarchy, and I'm actually, so I just interviewed for a higher title, and I'm climbing that ladder.
You can
And
do it. I believe in you.
right,
I
and
believe in you.
it's like a supervisory managerial role, and I'm like, that isn't something that I really want, but I need the money that it's going to provide me. And I have to like sit back and look at I can I was getting that like exceptional thought process where like, oh, I'm going to get this position because I do a better job than everybody else. And and I have more technical skill and I'm better than them. And like, I
That's
mean,
good. Yeah.
is
You're
that
like,
is that based in
girl.
reality? Maybe, but you know, like we haven't gotten any responses for these interviews yet, so it's like still in the works. But I'm like sitting around looking at my quote unquote come more than I see my own family. So like we've become very close on a personal level, and I talk to them outside of work, and they're struggling just as much as I am. And I have these like big ideas that, oh well, if I get in that position because I'm the perfect leftist, that I'm gonna uplift everybody with me. And meanwhile, like I am just a tool of the state now.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
So, and then like in my personal life, I am an administrator for a Facebook group for that's like labor rights and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, I got that founder syndrome now, and I am so important because I created this thing, you know and like I don't even do any of the work. Like I just let everybody else do it. Like I'm not even doing anything. And I am so fancy and special and precious to this group. And it's like it this whole hierarchical thinking permeates every aspect of our existence, and we most of the time don't realize it, or maybe we do and we are able to step back and look at it, but from a day-to-day how we're operating from day to day, like we can't like I'm like grasping for the words here. um Now I totally lost the train. um like I have to constantly tell myself that I am not that important and I don't know anything really. I don't know shit. All I know is that like where to go cop dope on the street and who I need to talk to, and like that's the kind of shit that I know. And even like talking in our cohort and the people in our circle in this death practice thing, I I don't have college education or anything like that. So it's like, I kind of get this like uh not inferiority, but it's like, oh, they know so much more and all the fancy words. And it's like, no, like I died on a park bench.
Yeah, totally.
Like
Yeah,
how like that's some pretty good education right there.
yeah, yeah.
you
That's
know
the, yeah, yeah,
so it's
yeah.
like, you have this like inferiority and superiority thing going on at the
That's
same
it.
time.
And that's the thing that I find so fascinating, and the reason why it's like there's like a mass unintegrating
Hmm.
factor here. It's like because whether you think you're superior and or you think you're inferior, both of those are the exact same problem.
Right.
It's like you're totally misattuning to reality in both of those ways. And of course the inferior people think the superior people are bad. And the
Right.
superior people think the inferior people are weak and bad.
Yep.
But on a real chemical level, the fact that you are dissociating and numbing out your pain via an inferior and or superior narrative is the same fuckery. It's
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yep.
It's essentially exceptionalizing yourself from reality, and
Right.
it feels really like it's literally a narcotic,
It
because
is.
you can kind of think these weird thoughts forever.
Yes.
Like they don't end on their own accord. It's like the wind up toy that keeps winding itself up over and over and over again. And then people go, okay, so that's manic depression or that's bipolar. It's like, no, 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 no. Like we're like missing the mark here. It's that like somewhere inside we're so deeply uncomfortable.
Yep.
We're so deeply fucking uncomfortable with some aspect of actually existing.
Hmm.
Like it has nothing to do with like rich or poor. Because rich and poor, this caste system was created because some people were deeply uncomfortable, right? It's like I'm so deeply uncomfortable, I have to do something about it.
Yep.
And that's where it starts to get dangerous, because it's like, so now, okay, so it's the Jews' fault, right? Right? Like I'm so
Yeah.
deeply uncomfortable. Here's the reason why. It's the Jews. It's like,
Yep.
whoa, okay. It's like you, and this, people say, well, I'm not like that. I'm like, but you are, because it's always somebody else. It's
Right.
always some other thing. It's some magical creature that's out to get you because you're like the cursed hero. And it's like, this is crazy. You know that, right? Like, this is crazy. But if you told it as a children's story, it'd be less crazy. Right?
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
if you made a punk rock song, if you made a song about it, if you made a movie about it, it'd be less fucked up a little bit,
Yep.
because you'd have
Yep.
an outlet for your stupid crazy bullshit about how deeply uncomfortable you are with existing.
Right.
Like, oh, now I have long COVID. I shouldn't have long COVID. It was their fault because the vaccine did it to me, or it was the plot by the Chinese. And it's like, no, man, shit just fucking happens.
Right. Right.
Like, You know, and this is the thing that I do understand because I don't have a fucking college education either. I learned all these big words the hard way, you know, like I just was like, I was like, there's fuck gatekeepers. I'll read the fucking books myself, you know,
Yep, yep.
and I'll do the drugs myself and I'll like, I'll fucking like do this shit because like nobody's here to save me. I have no safety net. I have no family safety net, right? So,
Right.
and I think the thing is like I could have easily, and I think some of this still happens, is where I just get upset that like, oh well, you know, the determination you have to like work. You know, there's a bit of meritocracy inside of the story. There's a bit of
Definitely.
like, but I also look at that and go, it's bullshit. I just got lucky. Even though my luck isn't that lucky compared to some other people's luck, it's
Hmm.
still fucking luck. It has nothing to do with my fucking merit.
Right.
So the inferior superiority is all based on these ideas of merit. Like if I just work hard enough, or if I just eat the right foods, I'll have a beach body. And it's like, yeah, let's talk to the 10 million people who eat the right foods and don't have a beach body and be like, okay, so clearly my fucking science math is not real because it doesn't work. It's not universal.
Yep.
Like this is not how reality works. You don't just plug in the right inputs and get the right outputs, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to dissect this like this inferiority superiority dance that we're always doing because, you know, I've talked to some people who are like, you know, they have much more money than me. Their lives are much better off, like financially, resource wise. They can go
Mhm.
take vacation whenever they want. They have houses on stolen land. Like, what
Right.
is this crazy? I'm never gonna, like, when am I gonna, you know, like, this is like so out of my league.
Right.
But they're still coming to me like they're like poor victims of
Right.
trauma. And it's like, oh, this is the actual issue. Like the actual issue isn't that you are or aren't traumatized. Like everyone's fucking traumatized.
Right.
Nobody's mom and dad loved them the way they wanted. Okay, sure, whatever.
Right.
But it's sort of like irregardless of that, like you can't see your privilege when you have that story. So therefore you can't use your privilege to help others.
Yeah.
Because actually you are like, I still am a victim. And it's like, oh, now we're talking about white people essentially, but we're
Yeah.
also talking about any class of people that has exceptionalized themselves from like the dirt poor or the
Right.
disabled. Oh, I'm not like them. I'm not like the lepers in the caves.
Right.
It's
Right.
like the lepers in the and they're like, why are they lepers in the caves? Well, they must have done something bad in a past life. It's like this is crazy thinking. It's like this is insane, but we still have this like, oh, you're not well, like, oh, you would have, you know, you got bit by a tick, but you caught Lyme disease because you weren't in the right vibration.
That came, so I just had shingles, and I, in my research, because I didn't know shit
Yeah,
about it,
yeah,
that kept coming up in like my Google searches. It's like where the shingles comes out on your skin is because of this past karma, and it's like, oh my God. Like, just tell me what to put on it so it stops itching.
right. And people don't. It's like my whole thing with death practice was getting to the root of like why are we so afraid of death
Yeah.
when death is actually like a benign event. It's like not
Right.
good. It's like it's actually quite peaceful to die on some
Hmm.
level, unless you're fighting, unless you're like being an asshole. Like it's not peaceful if you're being an asshole. But
Right.
because I go, okay, so when we die, there's usually an increased sensation of pain, right?
Yeah.
Like there's usually some kind of increased sensation of pain, and you look at biochemistry, you go, so what's that about? Well, an increased sensation of pain might not necessarily mean that there's more painful stimulus. It might mean that there's less protective stimulus like endorphins and opioids.
Yeah.
So now this is like how easy it gets into drugs. It's like, right, so we're angry that our bodies stop producing the narcotic that we were using to not feel so much of this thing that we don't like.
Right. Right.
So now death and pain are intertwined in this way that's actually like quite confused. Like it's too messy, right? It's too messy.
Right.
We're like death is painful. It's loss now. Now we're losing something
Hmm.
instead of recognizing like an increased sensation of pain just like an increased sensation of fear or an increased sensation of hunger or anything you don't like, anger, depression, sadness, like whatever. An increased sensation of one thing does not necessarily mean anything other than that.
Right.
It's like you're having an increased symptom, and that could either be because you have an increased like load of stress, like loads of stimulus accumulating and like hitting a breaking point or threshold, or the lack of the protective buffers, neurochemicals that you were used to, that were kind of keeping the tide like the little finger in the dike in the old story,
Right.
right? You're holding
Right.
back the tide with one finger. Well, you can't do that forever.
Yeah.
Can't do that forever. So the whole thing about death practice was recognizing that like if all that people are constantly doing is trying to evade death via evading pain, fear, and hunger all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually creates more atrocity because you're keep on like, well, it's got to be the Jews, like I have to avoid my fear of like being something, so it's got to be the blacks, it's got to be the women, it's got to be
Right.
the something. It's like it's got to be the AIDS patients. You're like Reagan, like all this crazy
Yeah.
shit, right? It's like they start to represent those people. Those people start to represent your like kind of internalized metaphor for like falling off of your fucking pedestal, right?
Right.
Because if they're just another person like me and they are got unlucky, it means it could happen to me. And I
Yep.
can't even bear to think about that. Right? So I'm going to
Yeah.
create more narratives that are more narcotics to try to increase the opiate load in my own brain so that I feel less things. But that's what narcissism means, because narcissism literally means to numb out.
Right.
And that's what the root of narcotic and narcissism are like the same.
Yep.
And the fact that we as a culture refuse to understand this like almost 2 + 2 = 4 kind of equation. It just boggles me that like we can't catch it in ourselves, but we're so easily willing to say, well, that's you're gonna
Yeah.
over there, you doing the thing. But if we all realize that everyone's trying to kind of increase their opiates and endorphin supply all the time through whatever means necessary, at that point to me, it gets collective because then we're all addicts. And actually that I can work with that.
Right.
Like I
Right.
can work with the fact that we're all trying to constantly increase our endorphin and opioid like production. And then I can go, okay, so we look at that and then we look at pain, fear, and hunger as not being a kind of necessarily a problem. And we work on actually befriending like pain, fear, and hunger as a wisdom process rather
Mm-hmm.
than rather than all this other stuff. But you get to a wisdom process of it, like pain actually matures you in some way,
Right. Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
it's still like, and to me, I still feel like I'm like screaming at the fucking mountains sometimes because it's like, to me, this took me quite a few years to get to this conclusion because I had to go into my own addictions to get the conclusion, right? It's like,
Right.
and then when you tell other people, you kind of hope that they'll get it. But then it's like, then you hit the wall of like, oh no, you can't force anyone into this. You can only offer the possibility from your own experience that this might actually be what's really going on.
Right.
And the root of your addiction is that you just can't sit with how uncomfortable you are existing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard to even have these conversations when people are struggling. Like there's still a privilege to even be able to have this conversation
Oh,
because
definitely.
people, right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Because you have to get a baseline of nutrition to be able to have your brain to work hard enough that you could
Right.
actually resist the urge to do the dissociated numbing
Yeah.
narcotic addiction thing. And
Yep.
so, it's like so heartbreaking, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's so fucking heartbreaking, right? It's like I can't. But yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of my closest confidants all happen to be former drug addicts because they kind of just get that piece of it. I find it difficult to talk to people about this who have never experienced drug addiction, because they're better than drug addicts.
Mhm.
And I don't have an addiction, and I don't have addictive behaviors, or
Oh,
meanwhile they're like smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee all day long, and it's like, what? And like
yeah,
those are just the easy ones.
totally. Yeah, right. Those are like the gateway ones. It's like those are the ones you can see. How
Yeah.
about the ones you can't see?
Right.
Like all the emotional addictions and the
Yes.
codependency patterns that we're actually addicted to we're actually addicted, like in clown. So in clown and improv, they talk about like high status and low status
Mhm.
clowns. And these are like archetypes, but they're not really archetypes. They're like us, like we
Yeah.
are always trying to play high status or try to get high status via playing low status, which is like
Mhm.
how complex it gets. It's like I'm going to self deprecate so that the more I self deprecate, the more I feel better than you,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that's like one downing or one upping. Like,
Right.
and
Right.
you can one up your one down by like, oh, you think that's bad? Well, last week I fucking, you
Yeah.
know, last week I
Yeah.
totally got too drunk and ran my car across a bridge of pedestrians.
Right.
It's like, and it's like you're kind of humble bragging about something you shouldn't have done
Yeah. It's like the
because
best of the
something,
worst.
right, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like you get. And if we put it in the clown world, it's deeply absurd but also deeply terrifying because we're like, oh,
Right.
this is real life. But
Yeah.
the thing that I find so heartening about theater is that you can't exile these patterns because they exist. Like we have
Right.
to talk about them, we have to deal with them, we have to metabolize them, we have to transmute them, we have to make art with them, we have to do something because they're
Hmm.
not going away. And even if we were like all on top of our shit, we would still have a bad day.
Right.
And this is the thing I think people don't understand. It's like they want to get to this place where they do all the right things. They eat the right food, they take the right supplements, they do the
Yeah.
right exercise, but they still get old.
Right.
And so no matter what you do, something is going to fall apart by no causal, like it's not a local event. It's not like, oh well, you drank too much and now you're fucked. You have a hangover. That's a
Right.
causal event. You're like, okay,
Right.
this makes sense. But however, there will become a time in your life, and this happens to everyone, it's happened to every addict, every person. There comes a time in your life where things just fucking break. And it's like, I did all the right things and I still kind of lost. I
Yep.
still kind of lost the game. It's like the Kobayashi Maru and fucking Star Trek.
Yep.
It's like, how do you deal with the fact that you can do all the right things and still fail?
Right.
And like, oh, that's like a wisdom event. That's a fucking like eat my shit humble pie event, right? Like that. And everyone's trying to avoid that constantly, but it will happen. It will happen anyway.
Right.
And so in clown or theater, we can put all these things up on the stage and actually like play them out and like indulge in them, right? Because it's actually kind of fun to indulge in like narcissism.
Oh yeah.
It's totally fun to indulge in like victimhood.
Yep.
Oh, I'm poor victim, save me. Oh, I'm like, oh, this feels great. This is great. But if we do that on the stage, everyone kind of knows you're fucking playing a character. It's not
Right.
real. But you still get the real bite. You still get the real chemicals,
Yeah.
but you don't. But we're not like pretending you're a king, okay? We're not like you're not actually a fucking king, okay? You don't.
Yeah.
You just played the fucking king for like 20 minutes. So like, calm the fuck down. And the fact that we are not doing that in society often as a community, we're actually just relegating that to like celebrity figureheads. Like, oh, well, they
Right.
can do it for us. It's like, well, for me, it's really painful because it's like I can only get so much proximal chemicals from watching somebody else do the thing that I need to do.
Yep.
And so, if what I really need is to first see someone go through a process before I do it, that's fine. It's just modeling, right?
Yeah.
Kids do it all the time. How do I do this? Watch me. Okay, I'll try it. Okay, like it's just a process. But the fact that we in this culture are so stunted or blocked from, we're kind of systematically prevented from doing the thing that we need to do as a collective,
Yeah.
that we get into these like it starts to be a perpetual cycle of stagnation where like the addiction creates more addictions because there was never a place where the addict could act out their addictions, right? Like actually
Yeah.
like make art from their addictions and then have a bunch of other people kind of hold that a little bit,
Yeah.
ask questions, you know, like do the thing that artists do,
Right.
reflect and inquire, develop the work, which is like, I get what you're saying, but I think it needs developing, you know, like I think you
Yeah.
need to, right? Like this thing that artists do where it's like, it's not quite there yet. It's like, but I see the kind of general direction.
Yeah.
Let's keep
Yeah.
developing the work. And for me, that's like what art is. It's like, so I'm really angry, so I drew this picture. Great. Okay, that's the first step. But if so many people aren't even at that step, oh my God, we're so like I'm like, oh God, we're so fucked. Because like to just even get people to be like, I feel a feeling and I make art out of that feeling as step one,
Hmm.
suddenly there's like 10,000 barriers to that step.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, this is why capitalism works. Because even though you get a bunch of stuff, you never do anything.
Yeah. Yep.
You never do anything. Um, Yeah, so I'm wondering about how you use your art practice to deal with all the things we've been talking about. The frustration, the addiction, the spiraling, the symptomology of long COVID, all this stuff, right? Like, how are you using your art practice? Because we haven't really gotten into what your art practice is.
Mhm.
How are you engaged in an ongoing art practice with all of this stuff, with all this material?
So, you know, I I didn't even really start calling myself an artist until recently, and I like try to do like art school and all that, and like that didn't really work out more longer than a semester.
Yeah.
So like my idea of what is art and who is an artist has really changed a lot um since joining your group and the death practice stuff. And even just like theater, especially because I don't know a lot about theater. Um, so I was an illustrator. I am an illustrator, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
um, but like I've always had this like conflict where it's like, okay, I'm an illustrator, so I can only be an illustrator, and anything outside of that isn't a valid medium for me.
Yeah.
So I've had this conflict with that the last few years, especially because I started showing my work and I was in some art shows, and the motivation behind that was like, oh, I got to make this thing that's going to sell, and I got to make this thing that people want, and so now I stopped doing that. I don't do art shows anymore. I don't do any of that. I don't really show anybody any of my art anymore, just to kind of um get away from that mindset and shift it into something new. Um so, you know, the way I've been incorporating this practice of art making is like my whole existence is an art project. um Even preparing for this call, I was like, what am I gonna wear? Like that's art. My aesthetic, like my
Right.
space is my art. And
All aesthetics.
yeah,
Everything's aesthetics. Yeah.
right. And like I've before I had my current job, I owned a floral studio and I did floral design. So it was a lot of designing space. And the little experience I have with theater work, I did set design. So it's all creating environments for me, and cooking also.
Yeah.
I have a nutritionist, and I have some issues with like feeding myself.
Yeah.
So we were
You
having a
know.
conversation.
Yeah.
we were having a conversation. He's like, you're an artist, like just paint a picture with your food. Like
Right.
it's really not that complicated, you know? Like go to the store, pick out some pretty colors and go home and put it on a fucking plate, you know? Like,
Yeah.
and that like, I don't want to say it cured me of an eating disorder, but like that was such a breakthrough, just treating this nourishment as art,
Totally.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, and you know, with like tactile things and texture and uh just decorating my space, and it, it's all orchestrating a sensory experience.
This is it. Yeah,
Yeah.
the things that I'm so fascinated by after sort of doing this whole flip flop of like what is an artist, and an artist to the capitalism is different than an artist to the artist, and that's the other
Yes.
problem we have is that like we also subcategorize artists into like better or worse, but also like kinds of artists, and then we
Right.
like then we sort of preferentially hierarchicalize like the kinds of art that are better than the other kinds of art. And it's like
Yeah.
super crazy because it's just like it's all just what you're talking about, which is like every artist has to find their way in to the healthy or interesting aesthetic experience that they need to be able to like do something about something.
Right.
That's all it is. It's like so for some people cooking is just cooking, but there's an aesthetic to the pragmatism of that too. But they
Yep.
don't call it an aesthetic because it's just functional or something. But it's like no,
Right.
no, no, no. So everything is a choice making sort of choice making and risk taking because
Hmm.
you don't necessarily know what's going to work when you try something.
Right.
You might have to try 1,000 different doors into something before you kind of develop that tiny particular aesthetic about this particular context, right?
Right. Yep.
Like you take cooking and it's like, how do you approach cooking? How do you approach the ingredients? How do you approach the shopping? How do you approach the actual process of the cooking?
Right.
We haven't even gotten to the eating yet. You
Yeah.
know, we haven't gotten, and it's like there's all these parts that you can focus on and kind of really get to something, that is more artistically enjoyable to the artist themselves. Like, because
Right.
that's the first step is like, do I like fucking doing this? If I don't like fucking doing it, that's a recipe for burnout and
Yep.
resentment, right?
Yep.
And then once you figured out what you like, then you can bring it to an audience and go, well, I like these things about it. What do you like about it?
Right. Yep.
Instead of the other way, which is, I don't know what I like about this yet. Please tell me what you like about it. And it's
Yeah.
like, uh-oh. Okay, so now that's a dangerous doorway to open. And you can only open that doorway when you, as the artist, have enough self-worth and
Yep.
self-esteem to be able to throw things at a wall and not take shit personally.
Yeah, exactly.
But for a lot of people, art is an intimacy process. It's not
Right.
necessarily a social action yet.
Hmm.
It is first and foremost a kind of self hygiene, self development process, which is like a self intimacy, which is not just the self, but like intimacy with reality. Like, this is
Right.
how I walk through reality. I walk through reality like a flower bouquet designer. Well,
Yep.
that's fascinating. And then as a theater maker, because I think everything is theater, which I had to get there though. I had to
Hmm.
get there because I started out as like an artist, like an illustrator first as a child. It was like I
Yeah.
thought I was going to be like a cartoon, like a illustrator, some kind of graphic illustrator,
Right.
pre-computer, But that wasn't what was actually my system was actually not trying to do that. It was just that was the easiest inroad for my situation. That was my
Right.
easiest form of expression until I progressed to something that was a lot more seemingly extroverted.
Hmm.
But in my opinion, I'm not introverted or extroverted. I'm just like following these breadcrumbs of like, how can I be more like open to aesthetic dialogue in anything that I do, which is not necessarily about a product, but it's about a process, right? It's a
Hmm.
process of engaging with reality. I want to wear these clothes today. I want to wear these glasses. I want to put my hair this way,
Yep.
right? I want to listen to this music. Like you're tweaking
Yeah.
you're tweaking atmospheric controls, right?
Yes. Yep.
And
Yep.
and like that's great. And for me, it even goes deeper because it's like now I'm going to take away things.
Yes.
I'm going to take away what I like and actually recognize that's also an aesthetic process.
Yep.
It's just much more difficult, right? Like a subtractive process of a reducing process, a kind of almost like a in like I wrote this article part of the series is called Theater of Precarity,
Hmm.
which is like we're often doing theater and art in general as a kind of additive process.
Right.
It's a kind of like salvational process. It's like, let's make art that improves our life.
Right.
Like, let's do it. Okay, that's fine. But then we have a very small idea of what improving our life is.
Yeah.
It's usually adding more resources. It's usually hoarding more
Yep.
attention. It's usually more status. It's more some kind of moreness, some
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
plus sign or multiplication sign. It's like that's what we want. We want
Right.
pluses and multiplications, exponential growth. Let's do it. Whereas when you get to something like Theater of Precarity, you invest in the making and then you invest in the demaking.
Mm.
You invest in creating a situation by which the collapse or the decay of the art or the art making process is also viewed as art making.
Yeah.
And you actually lengthen the time of that so that you spend more time in the collapse than in the building.
Hmm.
So that you could actually experience this kind of like this strange kind of absurdist tragedy. You know,
Right. Right.
it's like you know, watching something fall down, but if you film it and then watch it fall down in slow motion, suddenly you're
Yeah.
like laughing a lot. And
Yeah.
we have this, right? We have like these videos of like people wiping out on skateboards, right?
Yep.
And we
Yep.
just watch them over and over, then we slow it down and watch it. What's that about?
Yeah.
Is it necessarily enjoying someone else's discomfort? I actually don't think so. I think there's something deeply human about wanting to savor the aesthetics of collapse and death and decay and
Yeah.
pain, but we have to have the correct um, interface with that, right? Like the
Yeah.
correct interface so that we can modulate all those feelings that come up from being in collapse or being in a precarious situation. And I think theater is really good at that because we can take a process and we can essentially like show it all in
Right.
space. It's like we can take a process which is time based and spatialize it.
Hmm.
And for me, that's fucking fascinating,
Yeah.
you know? And when you talk about that you're constantly designing space, like what all the things you're doing is like a kind of designing space, illustration, clothing, cooking, like it's all kind of designing space and
Right.
interaction with space, right? It's
Yes.
designing your engagement with space, right? How you
Yeah.
feel in space, right?
Right. Right.
So to me, that's like that's just theater. It's like, yeah. But to be able to have the lens by which theater and death practice can kind of do this thing, like they're together
Yeah.
and you're looking through the lens at the same time, for me, it's a deeply freeing moment because now a lot of these political struggles that we're dealing with that seem completely hopeless are kind of spread out in space rather than
Yep.
condensed in time.
Yep.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
It's like instead
Definitely.
of a sharp spear pointed at my heart, I have like this, I have something else. I have like an image of the energy of the spear spread
Right.
out over time and space. And suddenly I can kind of walk around the installation and feel things differently because I'm not like, you know, constantly, you know, managing my panic or something, you know?
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, the thing for me is like in 12 step and in addiction recovery, how much do people really focus on giving those recovering people, the people in the rehab, a kind of a new outlet by which they can explore their process? Like how much explicit, like sort of art therapy or artistic expression outlet is sort of in that culture?
Um, it is there. It's not, it's like, 101 level stuff. I mean, I've been to rehab like 6 or 7 times. So some of them had like art therapy courses or whatever, and then others didn't. Usually the state funded places did not have stuff like that. Um,
Surprise, surprise.
yeah, yeah. The one of the rehabs I went to was on the beach in Florida,
Hmm.
and they did like sculpture, and it was a lot of hands-on tactile things. There it's there, but only if you have money.
Right.
And you know um it, I went to some place like close to home for like an outpatient thing, and it was like this women's trauma group, and I fucking hated it. I didn't think I belonged there, but they had an art therapy group that would meet multiple times a week, so that was really the only thing that kept me going there. And they like had a kiln and everything, so like it was a little more developed. um
Yeah.
but even that, I don't feel like the facilitators really knew what they were trying to get at with it. It was more like, well, you're here and we're here for 5 6 hours, so this is an activity for you to do to dissociate,
Yeah.
and not really engage with the trauma or whatever you want to call it. um
Right.
it was just, here, we're gonna just keep you busy for a couple hours, and then you're gonna go home and sit in your shit alone with
Right.
no community support. you know
Right.
and then they wonder why there's like recidivism. They finish the program and then the same people are just coming back to start over again.
Right.
um
Right. There's no biochemical transformation of the initial
right,
energy that caused the addiction to happen in the first place,
right, exactly,
which is like,
exactly.
like and this is the thing too, is like, the more I get into this, the more I'm like, really, we're really the rehab that we have to do kind of first is an educational rehab for the
Yeah,
human body, which is like this ability to sort of perceive life differently and therefore perceive your behaviors differently. Because if you can perceive your behaviors as like, okay, so for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to move around my space and that will be a kind of interpretive dance.
right,
And I'm going to use that interpretive dance to sort of like just go through some of these actions that are indicative of some of these emotional states that I'm
yeah,
in. And you set a timer and you do it. Now, if you do it alone, that's fine. But if you add a witness and that witness is able to give you accurate critical feedback and reflection, suddenly you've got something really great going.
right,
Like you've got the ability to actually transform in real time the biochemical patterns that are causing the so-called thing that you don't like, or the tendency or the habit or whatever, what
right.
we're talking about. But it requires this reimagining. It's like the imagination has been broken on some level. Like the
Mhm.
imagination has been beaten into submission on some level, that we can no longer imagine that the body is anything other than a kind of prison that we are um, stuck with or something.
Right, right.
And so everything about it is like, how can I make my body stronger, faster, more healthy, better? For what reason?
Right.
Oh, well, so that I feel less pain and less hunger and less fear. But it's like, okay, for what reason?
Yeah,
Well, then I'll feel peaceful. I'm like, are you fucking sure?
right.
Because, like, peace, from what I've found, is that peace or peacefulness is a fucking moving target.
Yeah,
And, like, you can find it and then it doesn't stick around. And you can say, oh, that's because you didn't do the right meditations or something. It's like, no, 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 no. I do the right fucking meditations. Like I know how to I know how to walk up to the doorway of peace.
right.
However, there are moments when peace, a mind of its own, will walk away or do something else, and that is not a fault of the practice. That is a natural
Yeah.
occurrence. That's like why do birds fly? I'm like,
Right.
because like it's like the world is doing a thing. Like, what did
Yep.
you think? It would stay still for you? Like,
Right. Right.
it would not move around for your benefit? Like, what is this idea that you have about the body and about nature, that it's supposed to sort of stay in a way that you like? And it's like, so there's this thing that I keep coming across, which is like, you do all these things, you search for solutions, and those solutions are also in some way addictions. Like,
Hmm.
if I don't drink my coffee, I can't go to CrossFit, and if I don't go to CrossFit, it's like this on and on.
Yeah.
It's onwards and upwards forever, which is like, this is not really the thing. Because for me, peacefulness is a moving target, and it requires me to engage in the aesthetic trials and tribulations of creativity in order to actually discover peace differently each time.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? And that's how, like, it's like, oh, peace moved. Yeah, because peace changed, because you changed, because like
Right.
shit's not real on some level. Shit's not like fixed. It's
Right.
like you found peace in that moment, and that was a relative moment. And now you're bored again. And why are you bored? Not necessarily because you did something wrong, but because the land, like, everything's in movement. Everything is
Mhm.
kind of moving around, and like, you watch cats do this thing, right? It's like they find the shade, but then the sun moves.
Yeah.
Now, are they angry at the sun? Like, what is this craziness? Like, whoa, no, they just kind of do something else. They're like, time to go eat some food or something, or like go over here.
Right.
And I think that as humans, something in us is so annoyed that we're kind of forced into doing something by the world, that we don't notice that that's an invitation for art making.
Right.
Like, even just getting up off your chair and stretching, yeah, it might feel good for a number of reasons, circulation and health and all this stuff, and sedentarism and all this stuff. But if we can look at just the act as a potential theatrical moment, suddenly there's like all this extra energy available to do things that don't make any logical sense, and yet fill my life up with actually like more life. There's
Right.
more life there. And it's not life against death. Like, that's the other thing. It's not life against death. It's like life and death as the same thing
Right.
happening. And I'm engaging with it in such a way that I'm not dissociating anymore.
Yeah.
And the lack of dissociation might be more painful, but it's somehow more meaningful and more enjoyable on some level, because I'm no longer just trying to reduce a certain kind of symptom, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, it's like I'm doing a lot of these interviews because, like, on some level I want to be able to like talk about this, and it takes a long time to talk about all the aspects of it,
Right. Right.
from all the different angles. But on some level, if you just get enough people in a room for a long enough time with the right worldview and the right aesthetic inquiry, some crazy cool shit can happen.
Oh
And
yeah.
it doesn't have to be about healing, and it doesn't have to be about, like, it doesn't have to be about the thing we think it's about.
Right.
It can just be like what you said. It's like they had a kiln. They had a fucking kiln, and I stayed there because I got to like fucking do pottery. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, like the point is the point.
Right. Right.
like why do you like to do pottery? Is because is it healing your trauma? It's like, I like it because I like it, because doing it is
Right.
like the feedback loop is so close.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not doing it for a reason over there. Well, if I do 50,000 pottery wheel things, my addiction will be gone.
Right.
No, what if that doesn't, it's a side effect. It's like, I like to sit at the potter's wheel. I like to
Yeah.
touch the clay. I like to just feel the centrifugal force happening.
Yeah.
wow, this is such an aesthetic sensory experience, you know, like I'm just in the dance of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Did the Was it a good pot or a bad pot? Do you fucking care? Like I don't fucking
I
care.
actually think it exploded in the kiln.
Yeah, right? It just just blew up and you're like, "Well, that's fucking interesting," you know. Yeah, and I think that, you know, we need to have more conversations where every single act of these processes, whether they're planned or improvised or spontaneous or accidental or random,
Hmm.
you know, whatever, every single act of life's process, when you're engaged with it, is art making.
Yeah.
The kiln exploding was art making. Did
Oh
you do it
yeah.
on purpose? No, but something was happening, and like
Right.
that's what happened.
Yeah.
It's like dropping an electric guitar just to see the sound it makes. Are you
Right.
playing it? I don't know. Like is gravity, you know, like who?
Right. Right.
But you're like something's. I'm engaged in the process.
Yeah.
Whether the process is beautiful or ugly, that's no longer the point, right? It's like I want to do this with the flowers.
Yeah.
Why? Because I haven't done it before,
Right. Right.
you know. And for me, it's like communally. We need this communally because we're also talking still in an individualistic sense. Like if you have enough money, if you have enough resources, you can be an
Right.
artist. Right? And what I'm trying to get to is like a place where people can go routinely, where they see other people in process all the
Hmm.
time. And then they can come together for kind of like reflective circling or something that's
Yeah.
about the process, because everyone will be like, I'm a painter, I'm doing this, I'm making theater, I'm, you know, I'm designing
Right.
you know, like whatever the fuck you're doing, I don't care, I'm designing a toy for kids, you know, like whatever. It's not the point. The point is like we as a culture have been divorced, like and it's a political action that we why we've been divorced from this. We've been divorced from seeing others in their process and being engaged in some part of that person's process in real
Yeah.
time. Like the
Yeah.
ability to kind of reflect but not judge, like not to just critique, but to actually be in the middle of the work in progress and be like, so I saw it, here's what I liked, here's what I'm curious about. This is my feedback to you, and then you're going to keep iterating, right?
Right.
And then if you do that for me, I'll keep iterating. Instead of, I finished my product, here, now judge it. It's
Right.
like,
Right.
no, 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 no. I want you, the audience, the community, to be involved more quickly in that process and in more often times in
Yeah.
different ways so that we can all see each other kind of failing and succeeding until
Yeah.
failure and success actually are intertwined. It's like, oh,
Right.
you had to fail so that this could happen.
Right.
And
Right.
I saw it for 6 months, so I know it's true.
Yep.
That's what we're missing as a collective. We're missing the kind of like this kind of like long term, like this was what the promise of college I think was supposed to be about,
Yeah.
which didn't turn out that way for a lot of people. But the
Yeah.
process of being like, we're watching each other progress in our own pathways, but we're coming together to kind of like reflect off of each other different things so that our art can be different the next time.
Yep.
And that's what we're missing as a collective. And it's true that like to get this kind of work done now, you have to be very lucky and you have to have a lot of resources.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out a way to do this with like very punk rock, like a structure and just bodies in a room. Like that's all I
Right.
want is like,
Right.
I have the structures. Can we get the room? Can we get the buy-in from people? Can we show the model and then do like incubators?
Yeah.
Like, because you need time. You can't do it in a day. You
Right.
have to do it over time to see the change in yourself and each other, which is also what addiction recovery I think is in its best form, is like
Yes.
you're involved in somebody else's healing and they're involved in yours.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this is something that I've witnessed with the death practice group in myself and in some of the people in our cohort. You can witness the shift where it's like they're not trying to win something. And I noticed this really in myself the last few months, actually after the whole group thing dissolved. And then I was like kind of left there on my own again. And I'm like, all right, so how do I carry this forward? And that's where my what my art process is now currently, that's when it really started to take off a little bit. And I did that thing that like really destabilized a lot of people, all the how-to book titles, and like
That was
I was
great.
getting like so many messages, like people thought I was suicidal.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is great.
This is
Like,
great. It's
and
a
that was like
theatrical
a really,
provocation. Yeah.
that yeah, it was a really big breakthrough for me. And then I'm like, okay, now I need a new medium.
Yeah.
And so, that's that the last few months that have fed off of that. But nobody's really witnessing the process
Yeah.
right
And
now.
and sometimes it's fine, but and
Yeah,
I think that this is interesting too because like I've always treated social media like a stage.
yeah, yeah,
It's a fucking stage and anything can happen. So why
right,
don't you just do what like just try shit out.
right,
Like
right.
sometimes I go on there and I'm like a TED talker.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah,
I go on there and I'm a fucking stand-up comedian.
right. Yep,
Because
yep,
I'm just like this is a blank canvas and it's like like I'm just gonna try shit, see what happens.
yeah,
And I'm gonna keep trying it because like as long as it's available, I'm going to use it.
right, right.
But it's not going to use me. I'm going to use it. It's like a miniature rehearsal room. It's just a
Yeah,
it can't do all the things, but it can do some of the things very quickly and
right.
very well. Like you can get reactions, and you're like, well, okay, let's got some reactions.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm interested in sort of like so that's interesting to hear. I'm really happy about that and the breakthrough because
Hmm.
when you're no longer trying to win, you actually have more opportunities to win in this
Yes.
weird way because like your game you've changed the goalposts for so radically in your own heart, it's
Right.
just different. But I'm interested in sort of like because even I had to do this. The group dissolved because I was like, something is not really working for what I'm trying to
Right.
get to. But I'm not like angry at the product. I'm like, that was just that
That's just
art
what it
project.
was.
And
Yeah.
now it's here and it's always like it's here. I made here's a body of work. It's like
Right.
click. So
Right.
now it's like move to the next body of work. I'm thinking, and this is like, so I have a webinar next Monday evening. So I'm going to talk about what would potentially be like a death clown cohort laboratory, which would be like a 3 month process. It's like
Hmm.
chunks of 3 month intensives or something where people meet over time to develop work
Yeah.
together and
Yeah.
develop the skills and actually like have to develop and get the critical feedback. And I actually did model it a bit after college because I was like, you know what? Some of this makes sense. You have
Right.
semesters, you have homework assignments.
Yeah.
Like if you take away the like I won a degree and now I'll get more money. Like if you take that away and make it like really anti-capitalist, which is like if you give people the opportunity, they will learn what's interesting for them.
Right.
Like with children, like play-based learning,
Yeah.
they will do it and people go, well, how will people do labor if they don't get paid or there's communism? It's like, have you seen people like
Right.
they fucking have hobbies that they don't get paid for that they do almost obsessively that is great labor. Like
Right. Right.
it's like they do art and they do make toys and it's like people do stuff.
Yeah.
You just have to give them the opportunity to learn in a way that allows them to keep learning, which is fun if you
Right.
do it right.
Yeah.
But we have to reweave the community back into the learning process where it's like you're oscillating between solo work, like I wrote these poems or I wrote this song or like here's a first draft of something, like
Hmm.
you're working kind of a bit solo, but then you meet with a group that helps you refine your work. You do some exercises, you get more stimuli, you
Right.
stimulated, right?
Right.
And then you go back to working and thinking about what you need to do. The medium maybe needs to change. Maybe I was thinking about this a different way, you know? And then
Yeah.
you go back to the group. It's like this ability of the artist to both be an individual and to have a personal practice of art making, but also have a communal practice of art making
Yeah.
process. That's for me like what my next horizon is to go, what if I took the best aspects of school system and college, and like what if I took the best and not any of the worst,
Right. Right.
and actually got a small group of people to experience what I'm talking about, like the actual ebb and flow and time-based noticing of each other and themselves,
Yeah.
that has an arc, a clear beginning, a middle, and a clear ending.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like a semester. It's like
Yeah.
this is the midterm and here's the end. It's like fucking, and in some way we just crave the ritual of it. You know,
Right.
in some way
Right.
we just crave the like this is this thing. We go through this process. It's done. If I want to, I can do another process. You know, like
Right.
whatever. But I think we've just lost the being mutually entangled in each other's process because we're in such competition with each other.
Yes. Yep.
But the best work that I've made is like it's not quite competition, but it's also not quite purely collaboration. It's
Right.
like a mixture of like individual yearnings and aesthetic desires and collaborative insights, reflections, and maybe even like part of it is a collaborative, you know, like
Yeah.
part of the work intersects. It's like I'm the artist, but then there's all these people that I'm giving thanks to because they helped me make my art, you know?
Right. Right.
And
Yep.
I just feel that because the art world and the capitalist world are so, like, we have so much plagiarism in this world, we have so much theft,
Yeah.
we have so much crazy shit going on that we're very suspicious of each other. You know, we're very suspicious of each other, and so we want to like keep our art secret. And
Right.
that's, I think that's okay, but then we're missing out on something. We're missing out on the collective organizing of art making, which is like part
Yes.
of why, for me, it keeps coming back to not just addiction rehab, but community organizing.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, I miss in my blood a community that is sort of fucking around and finding out together in real time, transparently in public,
Right.
which is what you have in other cultures that are more damaged by colonialism. You
Hmm.
have less of this ability to be alone and more of the ability to just have to figure it out together.
Right.
So you're having a picnic, but it's also a dance, but it's also a ceremony, but it's also, it's also
Yeah.
mutual aid. It's
Yep.
like you're just like throwing everything at the same time almost. And it's like
Yep.
some
Yep.
people are doing yoga and some people are singing, and it's like there's something there that we all lost or was taken from us.
Hmm.
And what I'm trying to do with the next, this death clown thing is return all of that in a kind of highly potent package that can actually like liberate the
Yeah.
aesthetics from the system, because the aesthetics are already there. They're just masking as addiction, depression, anger,
Right.
mania, like they're just masking on some level. And we need to have the right container to let them unmask, but then that's a whole nother, ethical. That's an ethical like
Right.
design problem, right? It's a
Right.
it's it
Right.
is it's a harm reduction because you have to like go, if these are people are addicts, we still have to design this program with harm reduction in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at. And it's like part of why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I don't necessarily even know the right questions to ask, but like going forward, I'm really looking at how to have maybe a committee or something, maybe
Hmm.
some kind of like out facing something, some kind of interface committee that actually can look at the whole process, the structural design of the process,
Hmm.
and sort of be able to say, I think you need to add more harm reduction here, or you need to like,
Yeah.
and that's like the real facilitator curriculum teacher design thing that's like
Right.
really difficult, because it's one thing to kind of know you can make the art and know how to do it. It's another thing to kind of recognize that the process is going to trigger people's un unrehabbed addictions.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
And
Yeah.
so that's the sort of thing that I keep looking at is like, I'm going to do it anyway, but I have to go in knowing that in order to deal with these unrehabbed addictions, we have to both like activate them and kind of contain them at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
do that through art making, but because we're not in a real community and we're on Zoom, the accountability is very low.
Right.
So, these are just the kinds of things I'm like, God, there's so many moving fucking parts. So part of it is me sort of even saying, like, on this podcast, like, I'm very interested in sort of people that can want to be part of it, but also want to have enough skill and also want to be able to give feedback on the meta process itself from
Yeah.
different kinds of lenses. Because I do think that in order to design something that actually works for multiple kinds of people in multiple stages of life,
Hmm.
in multiple resource brackets, right?
Right.
Like this,
Right.
that we actually need to have, first I need to test run it, but then once it's test run, the structure needs to become modular enough that other people could run it for other places and it still
Yeah.
would work, but it would be sort of maybe sequenced slightly differently for
Right.
different things. And that's the thing that I can't even see yet, and it's not really mine to see,
Yeah.
because on some level I'm the guinea pig going, this is the next thing.
Right. Right.
You want to come on the wild the wild octopus ride with me, because like we're gonna do like a test run, and we have to all know what's involved in a test run.
Right. Yeah.
So that's sort of the edge of where I'm at, like because all the things we're talking about are so big. There's such big fields of interest. People
Yeah.
can spend their whole life just dealing with art, or just dealing with therapy and addiction, or just dealing with labor organizing. And I'm also going, yeah, but they're kind of all. It's all.
You're
I
all
just want. They're all in the.
right.
They're all in the room. They're all in the room. Here they are.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's just sort of like the. Yeah, that's the soup that I think we're all in, but that's definitely the soup that I'm in, trying to go, what didn't work last time,
Hmm.
and go, okay, a lot of things did work. I'm very proud of that 8-month period where I did that thing and
Yeah.
some people showed up. Like, I'm very proud of it, and I think it stands the test of time. Like, I'm just like,
Oh, definitely.
for what it is, it's
Yeah.
fucking like, it's really cool. Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, there it is.
It
Eight,
was very needed because people are using this term death practice and they don't really know what it means, and they have ideas about what it might mean, and those 8 months really put it into a specific context that we all needed in order to do this next thing. um, and it disbanded after 8 months, but that's as long as it took. And when you went into it, I think you had said it was going to be like 13 months or something.
sure.
But if I sit back and look at what it was actually made up of, to do that for 13 fucking months, I would have wanted to shoot myself in the head.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Like, it
no,
was
it's,
great, but I can only listen to so many lectures,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I need to
yeah,
do something.
right.
And I don't know if the rest of the cohort felt the same way, but I think you ended that at the right time.
Mhm.
Um, because you also don't want to give too much, you know? There's a very specific context, but there's also
Right.
a lot of room to move around with it,
Totally.
you know?
And for me, it's like I'm trying to do this on like a shoestring budget, right? Like, I'm a
Right.
sick person, I'm poor and sick, and also what I'm trying to do is build something that really is audacious on
Yeah.
some level, and I'm not going to it's like an impossible task. I'm not going to succeed. But the point is like I have a vision, and I need to pursue that vision, because part of my aesthetics is not just doing the art, it's teaching about
Right.
it's like the processual, it's like this meta process. But what I think ends up happening if I survive, more years, if I keep being able to do this, which is
Mhm.
unknown, I don't know. Every project I do might be the last project.
Right.
But I do think that like I did those lectures because I needed there to be like a backbone for if I die,
Yes. Yeah.
that someone could just go, here's kind of all of it. And I can go
Right.
down a million rabbit holes, but like on some level, this is like the complete arc of like
Right.
where you come, like what's it about, the history and cultural anthropology, genetics, like all sorts of shit, you know,
Yeah.
non-dual wisdom, animism, and all this shit. But then, you know, what I realized too is that like in a perfect world, which we don't have, but in a perfect world, people would be going through these like 3 to 4 month incubators
Hmm.
and have that just as a resource.
Right, right. And that's
Like,
actually
like
how I'm using it. Like all the links that you would include with the video recordings, all of that supplemental material, like I'm constantly referring back to things.
right.
You know, or like just watching 1 hour of this 1 month, you know,
Yeah,
just to
totally.
because I've grown and I've expanded my base since then. So now what you said then means something entirely different now, you
Yeah,
know?
and I knew that's what was going to happen too. The reason I
Right.
did it was because I was like, I'm absolutely sure that you could listen to this every year for the
Mm-hmm.
rest of your life. And if you really did it, you would hear something new that you needed
Right.
to hear because it's not really me. You know, it's not
Right.
really me
Right.
talking.
Exactly.
But the thing that I'm also saying is that like that's only one part of the work is kind of like a
Yeah.
pedagogical, it's like a pedagogical research where you keep listening, you keep trying to understand. It's like a research, ongoing research
Right.
that you have to do. But the other part of the research that you have to do is make something.
Yes.
And I think the big thing that people get caught in meditation, in tantra, in anything that feels like it's self-development or mental or spiritual, like
Hmm.
somehow it's immaterial, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of this kind of invisibilized thing. But because it's invisibilized, they don't treat it like art making.
Right.
They don't, when they sit down to meditation, they don't think this is just like sitting down to a blank canvas and I have my whole palette of paints in front of me.
Right.
Because they've been taught that it's something different. They've been taught that meditation is about something else or, you know,
Yeah.
like whatever. And what I have to realize in myself and in others is like I can only do so much, but what I can do is I can build the building blocks that eventually maybe somebody else will put together in a better way that I couldn't put
Hmm.
together in that way based on my situation. Like I'm still just building things that I don't see,
Right.
you know? But then once they're available, what will someone else be able to do with that maybe after I'm dead is like a wonderful proposition, right? It's
Yeah.
like you'll be able to maybe take these tools and remix them and like
Right.
use
Right.
them differently in a different context. And it's like, well, that's all that I wanted.
Right.
Um, and I'm now just in that phase two where it's like if phase one was like the pedagogical lectures and the research and the supplemental links that go on forever, then phase two has to be about like the cauldron of making things
Yeah.
and the art making, the developmental refinement process that is about like putting your emotions into something called
Right.
art making and then from there noticing how they change and it's like
Yeah.
oh
Like that's where the alchemy
that's
happens.
the actual
Yeah.
alchemy isn't necessarily in the lecture demo stuff
Right.
unless you've gotten to a point where it can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the trick. It's like, who
Right.
knows when that's going to happen for people? It's like,
Right.
because you have to have a certain level of skill where even listening to somebody talk is alchemical art making.
Right. Yep. Yep.
But that requires you to actually have done art making.
Yeah.
And then you can go, oh, this process is like this, and then I just apply it to this, you know?
Hmm.
It's a sort of transfer of application that we're
Yep.
talking about, which is why I love like cross-disciplinary artwork. It's like draw a picture, write a poem, sing a song, do a dance.
Right.
Like keep trying these different art forms out until you hit upon your personal um, Frankenstein of
Yep.
art, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you go, oh yeah, okay, cool. Maybe it's stagecraft. Maybe what I actually do is theater
Right.
because it's my personal Frankenstein of like all these things, and you have your Frankenstein.
Hmm.
And then my Frankenstein and your Frankenstein can kind of interact in the real world,
Right.
you know? And that's sort of the the vista, the horizon that I'm trying to look at is like, if everyone becomes empowered as an artist that is anti-capitalist, but
Hmm.
they're empowered, they actually view themselves and all of their actions as potential art making.
Right.
And they have the pedagogy and the politics to understand how important it is for collective bargaining power and all
Yeah.
this other shit and addiction rehab. Like they understand enough. It's not just a fanciful pleasure. It's not just, well, I do it because I like it.
Right.
It's part of it, but it's not just that. It's
Yeah.
actually political.
Yeah.
It's political to be an anti-capitalist artist who views everything, even failure and death, as art making, right?
Yeah.
It's very profound. And when enough people have enough of that level of self-esteem in a community, I think that's when the tipping point happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Definitely.
nobody's then looking for someone else to save them because we all see each other as artists making art.
Right.
It's like, oh, you're a therapist, so that's your art making. You see, it's like, it's not like you're
Yeah.
my therapist, save me. It's
Yeah.
like, your art is therapy or this kind of therapy.
Right.
I see you as another artist. You see me as another artist. We're on the same level.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no hierarchies. Maybe in a certain realm, you take the lead a little bit, but that's a temporary hierarchy.
Right. Exactly.
Only
Yeah.
because you're the better cook or something. And like
Right.
we
Right.
decided you're going to cook dinner today or something, you know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and that to me is the ethos that I think that, you know, the Black Panthers and the Rainbow Coalition and
Hmm.
all those groups that, you know, got demolished in the 70s and 60s were actually trying to show us what real socialism was
Right.
and
Yeah.
real communism. And real socialism and real communism are not what we see in the People's Republic of China or
Right. Right.
Soviet Union.
Right.
Real socialism is everyone gets fed, everyone gets to sing and dance, everyone
Yeah.
has a roof over their head, everyone gets support when they're stressed out,
Yes.
everyone is loved regardless of how difficult it is to love them.
Right.
Like actual distributed resource networks where people can pursue what they love, but not at the expense of the community. That's what the Black Panthers and that's what the Rainbow Coalition were actually all about. And it was all
Yeah.
about fighting the state because the state prevents us from being together like that.
Right. Right.
So, you know, and this thing about anarchy, it's like, yeah, that's anarchy. Anarchy is like collective mutual aid love,
Right. Yep.
like where everyone gets fed. And if things are difficult, we just come together to try to figure out how we can help. Like,
Mhm.
what the fuck is like, oh no, it's about destruction. It's like, no, no, it's about the destruction of a thing that didn't need to exist in the first
Right.
place.
Yes.
The
Yes.
destruction of the barriers that have been put up around us that then we enforce because we're so afraid of poverty.
Right.
It's like, no, no, no. Like, we have to get back to something that all of our ancestors knew how to do, which
Hmm.
is like collective governance.
Yep.
It's like duh, and then but then people call it, so you know, people have these ideas that it's about like what they do in Russia, and it's like, no, 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 that's just, they just called it that.
Right. Right.
They just called it a thing. It's like they didn't, but the actual behaviors are still fascist.
Yes.
So we never really got a chance in this culture to see the power of true socialism because the CIA and all the FBI,
Hmm.
their racist ways, basically killed all these black socialist
Right.
collectivist leaders.
Right.
And it's a shame, but it's also what wakes me up in the morning. You know, like it's what
Yeah.
gets me to keep going because this shit's hard.
Right.
But to know that there are other people who understood exactly what I'm saying better than
Mm.
I did, and they did it anyway, and they got killed for it.
Yep.
That's that's inspiring in some way. That's real power. And I think
Yeah.
that, you know, as a mixed race person, I've had to like fight for this, but I think that like you know, all white people know this too.
Hmm.
But they just, it's been so, like, you've been given, we've all been given the reward for complicity, right? We've all been
Right.
given the reward to be the spy inside of the good
Yep.
guys camp. right? In
Yep.
the
Yep.
rebels camp,
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I just, you know, it's hard to watch people on social media think they know what these words mean
Yeah.
when they are like so divorced from the actual action of feeding people, caring about people,
Right.
um, being a real person, like on the ground with other people on the ground, with
Hmm.
no pedestals and no hierarchies.
Yeah.
Um, it's very difficult to watch how trauma perpetuates itself through kind of like false narratives, right?
Yeah.
And how those feed addictions on and on and on and on and on. But I do think that like, I'm just saying it here because it's good to say these things out loud and just have them like recorded.
Hmm.
It's like yes, I'm talking about clowning and theater and art making and all this stuff, but I'm also really trying to say if the Black Panther Party was viable today, if the Rainbow Coalition was viable today, how would I contribute to it?
Right.
And I'm actually trying to make my projects from that place, which to
Yeah.
go, oh, I would do this. I would still do this thing.
Right. Right.
It's just that I'm doing it in the absence of the thing that should exist,
Yeah.
right? Which
Yeah.
is the whole like crazy thing. Anyway, I want to finish up. I'm so happy
Okay.
that we finally got to connect in this way.
Yeah.
Are there any sort of final thoughts or anything that you'd like to sort of say that maybe you really feel needs to be said or that you'd wish you'd said or anything?
Um, you had said something about the need for the ritual. And that's something that has always been a big thing for me, especially with addiction recovery, because that's a big part of addiction itself. Um, I'll just use my own experience as an example. I was a heroin addict, so it wasn't just about the substance. It was about getting the money and driving into the city and doing all the steps that led up to. And that once I got away from the substance itself, that was the thing that I missed the most, was that whole ritual. Like I would turn it into like a whole day long event. And when I and this didn't happen for a while after uh I got into recovery and I had a few years clean. I started looking at ritual as this form of rehabilitation. Um, you know, uh, they but some of the cliches that they use, it's like you got to get rid of your people, places, and things, and all the things that were present in your active addiction, all need to be changed and replaced. So it's like people need the ritual. They don't may not know that what they're doing is a ritual. um and we're like casting spells through these actions, right?
Yeah,
And
100%.
like when like I have people reach out to me a lot asking me about ritual, and it seems that the idea of what a ritual is like this big ceremonial thing where it's like so special. and I'm just like, bro, brush your teeth. Like,
Yeah, totally.
it's like, it's like, just do it, do something every day. And it doesn't even need to be every day. I have rituals that aren't a daily thing,
Yeah.
but like, it's setting this tone in your system that moves you into the next action.
Absolutely.
And you know I was I had a hard time with like God and higher power stuff for a
Yeah.
really long time. In fact, like only until a couple years ago after my dad died, I was militant atheist. And then I had some weird paranormal experiences. But I would call it good orderly direction. And that was part of this like ritualized behaviors. But at the same time, you can also get addicted to those too, and it gets way out
Totally.
of control.
Yeah.
So it's
100%. Yeah. Right.
like, so yeah, I forget where I was going with this, but it's important. Ritual is super important to us, and
Right.
we don't usually even think about
Right.
how much we rely on rituals.
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of baked into our genetics on some
Yeah,
level. Like there's rituals that are like super intense and we can take them too seriously. But we
right.
also forget that just the act of eating
Yes.
every day is a
Yep.
repetitive action that we do. Sleeping every day,
Yep.
bathing, uh, breathing. So
Mm-hmm.
anything that repeats itself and has meaning
Right.
is a ritual. Like,
Yep.
and then we can add layers and layers and layers and layers and layers to it.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
and that's the kind of magic of it. It's like at its baseline, it's just natural reality in a rhythmic, cyclical,
Yep.
arc-like fashion. Seasons, there's arcs to seasons. There's an
Yeah.
arc to the day. It's like a temporix, right? It's
Yep.
a
Yep.
temporal. Um, you know, your heart beats. That's a cycle.
Right.
It repeats itself. Your breathing breathes. It's a cycle. Your hormones cycle. Menstruation, the moon, like it's all just fucking cycles of
Right.
waxing, waning, beginning, middle, ending. Whatever you want to call it, like starting, stopping, transitioning to one thing to the
Mm-hmm.
other. There's dawn, then there's day, then there's dusk, then there's night. It's like
Yeah.
there's always a thing, but it has a transition kind of space. And I think the thing that like I try to get to is like, ritual is a very powerful word, and unfortunately, powerful things can be dangerous to
Yeah.
people who don't know how to use them, um, because they just don't know how to use them. It's like giving a child a very sharp chef's knife. It's like that's not a good idea.
Right.
Like you have to teach them. You have to teach them how to take care
Right.
of it and use it and sheath it and unsheath it and how to hold it, and you have to teach them all these things. Otherwise, it's a fucking dangerous.
Yep.
But
Yep.
if you know how to use it, it's fucking wonderful to have
Yeah.
like a very sharp chef knife. It's like makes your life much better. And I think that ritual is like that. It's like because we've been told that ritual is religious, essentially,
Yes. Yep.
we've actually lost some of our skill because it's a lie. It's like ritual. No, it's more that religion uses ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Ritual isn't religious. It's
Right.
just part of this game, and the art making process, I think for a lot of people, just like the taking drugs process,
Yeah.
like the whatever that is, it's like the art making process, the taking drugs process, the having sex process
Mm-hmm.
are all kind of the same structure.
Yep.
There's a preparatory phase, there's anticipation, there's preparation,
Yep.
there's the act of like getting into it, which is like a state change, and then you're like in it, and
Right.
all these things come up, and like there's this like weird in the thing, like the peak,
Yep.
and but then even in the peak, there's a peak of the peak. It's not like the same. It's a different. There's like a climax, and then there's a denouement. There's some kind of ending or transitioning out of,
Mm-hmm.
which usually involves becoming more tired, usually involves becoming hungry, usually involves needing to totally change your state or like take a shower.
Right.
Some kind of hygiene usually has to happen.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, exercise is the same way. You go to the gym. It's the same fucking thing.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
that the functions and the effects are slightly different because they have different, that's just like life. But
Right.
the meta of what we're talking about is the thing we're craving, and we're craving it on a collective level, not an individual level.
Right.
And I think that that's another big part of the issue that we're looking at, is that like for the drug user or the drug abuser or the drug addict or however you want to say it, because I don't really, for me,
Yeah.
it's just like
It's all the same.
everyone uses drugs. I don't fucking,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everyone's a fucking drug user. I don't know. But the point is that for anyone, they're craving something They're craving something, and all the drug is a focal point
Mm-hmm.
for all the things around it that you actually want to experience.
Right.
Like you want to experience accomplishing something.
Yep. Yep.
Like I remember doing drugs and being like, oh, this is really just about the fact that I exerted power when I feel powerless.
Yep.
Like, okay. So then you can break it off and go, well, how can I do that in other ways? So that the drug isn't the only way I feel powerful. The
Right.
only way that I feel accomplished is to do this. Well, I just now have more ways to feel accomplished. And then sooner or later, you can make the choice if you want to keep doing the drug or not. Because now you have other ways to get the same or different versions of the thing.
Yeah.
And I just feel that, like, because we live in such a scarcity based society, it takes a lot of luck and a lot of, it just takes luck. You have to be fortunate enough to have gone through really bad things and not died, essentially.
Right. Yep.
And then if you come out the other side, you can be a little bit like what we are talking about, which is like, I only am this person because I did those things on
Right.
some level. But
Yeah.
but everyone who does those things doesn't become a person like this because it's actually kind of like it's a luck.
Yeah,
It's luck
definitely.
that you don't overdose. It's
Yeah.
not really
Yeah.
like it's not really
Yeah.
like you. It's just luck. You roll the dice every time. You roll the dice every time, and we do have survivorship bias in this conversation.
Definitely, definitely.
100%,
I find that since the whole pandemic thing, I've noticed that people are, getting clean and going into recovery, and because they know my history, they're asking me for, I don't know, advice or something. And it's like, at this point in the game, like I was in active addiction 13 years ago, so it's like a whole lifetime ago, um and I am finding it very hard to have empathy for where they're at. And I'm like, uh, I just want to like shake them and be like, what are you talking about? Why are you so like, you know, like snap out of it, And it's like, no, I was exactly where you are.
right, right,
Like the things that they're saying are things that I have said myself.
totally, right.
So
There's a
I have to keep
process.
reminding myself that I have a lot of privilege, and you
Yeah,
know, that's
yeah,
basically
and we have to we have to honor where we're at, which is
right,
not there anymore. But we
right,
also have to honor on some level where those people are at. But I'm not talking about it in a hierarchical fashion. It's
right,
like I'm
right,
not like competing with anybody. It's just
right.
more that like at a certain point in maturity or sobriety, kind of interchangeable at this point.
Hmm.
At a certain point in maturity or sobriety, you realize that a lot of the things you believed were not true,
Right.
but they felt true based on your system and your biology and your biochemistry and your
Yep.
stress levels, right? Like
Yeah.
your, because doing drugs and being an addict and it injures your body. It injures
Right.
your psyche. It injures your nervous system. There's
Yep.
no getting around that. You, it's a cost benefit. It's like there's a real damage is done.
Yeah.
Damage is done.
Yeah.
Damage is done to the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the pituitary gland. Like damage is done, and you
Right.
take that. You have to deal with the fact that that's what you chose on some level. You
Yep.
chose it, but you also realize that in the getting sober, you will say a lot of stupid things.
Yep.
You will believe very wrong things because in your process, you're essentially like detoxing.
Yes. Yes.
And part of the detox is you think things that are just not fully fucking coherent,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
I think that like one of the great kindnesses people can do is if they've been through that, can just tell people straight up,
Hmm.
like I want you to be where you're at, but just so you know, it's total bullshit.
Right. Right.
and you won't know this probably for 5 more years,
Yeah.
but like in order to honor everything, I can't, I'm not going to agree with you, but
Yeah.
I'm going to agree that that's where you think it is, because that's actually how fucked up it is. To
Right.
detox is to be kind of Looney Tunes for a while, like
Right.
maybe for years you're just like, and that's also the sadness is like for some people it takes 20, 30, and it never happens in a lifetime. Like
Yeah.
even the detoxing process is like worse than the actual addiction.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Like there's no way to know. Like that's how scary like these
Yep.
things are, is like detox can kill you,
Yeah.
but the drug didn't. It's like
Right.
bleh, like fuck.
Yeah.
Like we don't know a lot of what's really going on, and it really takes a kind of bravery and determination to become a sober person. And at a certain point, you can only be doing it for yourself on some level.
Right.
Like I mean, it's like you can barely wipe your own ass at some point. You have to do it for yourself. It's like you have
Hmm.
to mature and be able to do that process, and it's extremely heartbreaking process, because in doing this work you will be so disappointed in the ways that you used to act.
Yep.
You will look back and go, oh my fucking god, you will cringe so hard at yourself, like.
Yep. Yep.
And part of the work is using that cringe now to benefit
Yeah.
yourself and others. Because if you don't use that cringe and make good art with it, you're going to spiral back because you're so ashamed.
Hmm.
So it just never ends. It's like this never-ending whirlpool of like, it's
Right.
like, here it is again. But I just think that saying these things is like there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow on some level, but there is a kind of intimacy with the rainbow itself, I think, which
Yes.
is like you're able to enjoy the rainbow without feeling shame about the rainbow, or like feeling like you have to own the rainbow, or feeling like the rainbow was taken away from you, or like all
Hmm.
these things. The reason why you did all the addictions in the first place is that
Right.
you just nobody taught you. Maybe you were in a really bad environment where you just couldn't just be with reality in a way that was just mutually beautiful.
Right.
No problems, no owning. Don't own the fucking rainbow. There's no pot of gold because you don't need a fucking pot of gold. You just enjoy the fucking rainbow wherever it lands. It's fucking great.
Yeah.
But because we didn't learn that, now we're having to learn it. And I think that like part of community is these conversations where we just put this out on the internet and we say, I don't know who this is going to reach,
Right.
but here's two people who are doing the work and have done it and are not trying to like sell you something.
Right.
Like all I can tell you is that it's a nicer life. Like, but that's my opinion. Like whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and to get that nicer life, you have to deal with very very difficult feelings. Like some of the most heartbreaking, depressing,
Hmm.
angst-ridden, suicidality, thought
Yeah. Yeah.
producing things. And if you don't want to deal with those, you're not really going to get sober, because you kind of have to deal with those,
Right.
because those were actually kind of there at the beginning. You just, this is the arc it took to get you to look at that shit.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, it's like, yeah, it's kind of lonely on some level.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like super fucking lonely. It's like
Yeah.
really weird. It's
Yeah.
like it kind of like tear up a little bit, because it's like there's so many times, because in the worst of times where I'm still detoxing sometimes, like I'm
Yep.
still like, oh, this is something I gotta fucking deal
Yep.
with something. At that moment, you are really kind of on your own.
Yeah. Definitely.
Not like in a bad way, you can't reach out and talk to people. Of course you can do that. I'm just saying
No,
that
but
like
nobody can really do it for you.
that's the thing. No one can actually do the thing where
Yeah.
the rubber meets the road inside
Right.
your own soul. It
Right.
can't, no one can do it for you. And I think that people are so angry that no one can do it for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, I've been
Why,
through
why
that
can't my
too.
therapist save me?
I've been through that too, where it's like
Yeah.
the best someone can do is sort of maybe hold space for you to do it yourself. That's
Right.
like the best. And if you get that, that's kind of a miracle.
Right.
Because most of the time people don't have the resource or the energy or the time to do that for you.
Yeah.
Because people are all struggling.
Yeah. And
And you have to
it's
like,
like, oh, we don't have communities of care, which has caused your addiction, and now we don't have communities of care to help you get out of it. So you're on your own, kid.
totally. Yeah, and just to be able to say it and not devolve into like hysteria or
Right.
despair.
Yep.
Because I see this a lot on social media. People finally have words to go with what's happening. ACEs
Hmm.
scores, trauma, attachment disorders. Like they have the
Yep.
words now,
Yeah.
but they're not yet at the point where they're like able to say, and and regardless of all that shit,
Hmm.
I'm still going to do the work.
Right. Right.
Like they're still just really angry that the world isn't the way they think it should be. And it's like, oh, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Because if I gave in to any of those at any point in my journey, I would have killed myself because there were so many years and months and days and weeks and hours where it was bleak
Right.
and I was looking for help and couldn't find it.
Yep.
And at some point, I had to do it anyway. And that's the thing that people are so resentful about. It's like, well, you shouldn't have to do it alone. I'm like, yeah, but that's actually kind of the wrong question on some level.
Right. Right.
It's like whether you have or have not the people around you to help you is kind of not the point. The
No.
point is you have to confront this event horizon inside yourself.
Yep.
And it's nice when people can hold space and tell you that they love you. And I know that it's hard and all the compassionate words. But I'll tell you, all those fucking compassionate words don't actually do the work. They've never done the actual work for me. Like
Nope. Mhm.
I can be like, yeah, 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 it's so sucky and whatever. But the actual work is something else. And that's why I, death practice. Because for
Right.
me, death practice is like a kind of compassion that is like far beyond this kind of like, um, you might not get the help you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, here's a methodology by which even not getting the help that you want could be wisdom and could
Right.
be intimacy and could be relationality and could be creative instead of a barrier to all of those things.
Yeah.
And I think that just when we're reckoning with a culture of addiction, of codependency and narcissism, like these are the big sitting withs because so many people, the minute the people talk about this, they want to solve it.
Right.
And I'm like, mm-mm. Solving it is sitting with it and not running away.
Hmm.
And actually looking at each other and being like, mm-hmm, I'm going to do it. And I hope you do it. And there will be times where we think that we're not doing it.
Right.
And it would be nice if there was a social welfare system that would help us do it. But I can't wait for that day.
Right.
And the power
Yeah.
that comes from actually being able to go, I cannot wait for help to arrive,
Yeah.
is actually like probably something that really turned me because I really, at a certain point, it was like, I can't, there's no help, there's no cavalry coming for me.
Right. Right. Yep.
It's not coming for me. What do I do? And
Yeah.
that to me is like a beautiful moment on some level.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, realizing that there's this like entitlement within you, and then you're like, oh shit. Well, I'm not entitled to anything.
Yeah, 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 totally. Well, I want to say thank you again. I think we're hitting the limit. I
Yeah.
loved this conversation. I'm so happy that we got to record it. Leah, if you have anything, I don't know if you do the socials or anything, but we will talk about that. And if there are anything that
Mhm.
you want to put in the show notes, we can add that. And if there's
Okay.
nothing, there doesn't have to be because the conversation stands on its own, and that's
Yeah.
totally. So thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
hope to talk again
Yes.
about all the things, but I'm just so happy to connect. And
Yeah, this was great.
thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
All right.